Have you ever paused and wondered, deep down, whether all the sacrifices you've made for your children and grandchildren were worth it? If you've found yourself quietly questioning this, you are certainly not alone. It's a dilemma that many parents face, often without realizing that they're not the only ones struggling with it. In today's video, we're going to dive into a hidden issue that affects countless families across the country. Something we like to call invisible freeloading. Invisible freeloading is a subtle yet pervasive problem that often goes unnoticed, particularly among parents who have spent decades of their lives working tirelessly to provide for their families. These parents, after years of hard work, dedication, and sacrifice, find themselves shouldering continuous responsibilities well into their later years, without the proper appreciation or support they deserve. Instead of enjoying their hard-earned retirement years, they are often expected to take on more duties, more financial support, and more emotional labor, all while their own needs and desires take a back seat. But it doesn't stop there. This issue is more than just about shining a light on the invisible burdens that parents are carrying. It's about empowering you with practical, actionable strategies that will help you set firm boundaries, protect your well-being, and reclaim the retirement you've rightfully earned. In this video, we're not only going to expose these silent struggles, but also offer concrete steps to break free from old patterns that may have quietly formed over time. By the end of this video, you'll hear true stories from real families, just like yours, that reflect the struggles and challenges of dealing with invisible freeloading. You'll gain insight into why these situations arise and, more importantly, what you can do to take control of your life once again. You deserve a retirement filled with peace, freedom, and joy, and we'll show you how to take the first steps toward making that a reality. This is the heartfelt story of Mr. John Miller, a 72-year-old retired teacher whose life is a testament to the quiet beauty of a life well lived. Together with his wife, Mary, who is 70, they both dedicated decades of their lives to shaping young minds in public schools. Their bond, strengthened by years of shared dedication, now finds them in a chapter of their lives filled with the calmness and simplicity of retirement. Their only son, Mark, now a grown man with a family of his own, has embraced his new role as a father with love and responsibility. When John and Mary retired, they made a conscious decision to leave the fast-paced, noisy city behind. The bright lights and the constant rush of urban life no longer appealed to them. Instead, they returned to their small hometown, a place where time seemed to slow down, and the air was thick with memories of their youth. In this peaceful retreat, they cultivated a life of tranquility, waking up each morning to the soothing sounds of nature and the gentle rustling of leaves. Their days were spent growing vegetables in their garden, nurturing delicate flowers with tender care, and tending to a small flock of chickens and ducks. Life, in all its simplicity, was exactly as they had dreamed it would be, peaceful, content, and full of quiet joy. Every day was a blessing, a moment to savor and cherish. But, as life often does, their serene existence was soon shaken by news that stirred both excitement and concern in their hearts. Their son, Mark, and his wife, Emily, were expecting their first child. The news was a cause for immense joy, but also one of anxiety. Mark and Emily both worked demanding full-time jobs, and without any family nearby, they found themselves in a precarious situation. The weight of impending parenthood, coupled with the practical challenges of balancing work and childcare, began to press down on them. In this moment of uncertainty, John, ever the problem solver, stepped forward with a solution. He suggested they hire a nanny to help care for their precious grandchild, offering a simple way to ease the burden. However, Mark, torn between practicality and his deep desire to protect his growing family, hesitated. The idea of entrusting his child to the care of a stranger felt daunting, even frightening. The mere thought of leaving his newborn in the hands of someone he did not know well filled him with unease. Furthermore, the financial strain of hiring a professional caregiver seemed almost insurmountable. As much as he wanted to alleviate the pressure on Emily, he couldn't shake the fear that the cost would be too great for them to bear. Caught in this emotional tug-of-war, Mark turned to his parents, seeking their wisdom and support. His heart ached as he realized that, despite his love and respect for his parents, the weight of this decision was too heavy to carry alone. His parents, who had already lived through so much, now found themselves in the role of caretakers once again, not just for their peace, but for the future of their beloved grandchild. The love they felt for their son and his family was undeniable, but so too was the quiet fear that they were standing at the precipice of a new chapter, one that demanded sacrifices, compromises, and deep emotional resilience. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure: Their family was at the heart of everything they did. But despite their deepest hopes and plans, things didn't go as smoothly as they had imagined. Mark and Emily, though deeply appreciative of the help they were receiving, found themselves reluctant to let go of the support they had come to rely on. The weight of their busy lives was not easily lifted. Emily, in particular, felt the full weight of her responsibilities. She had hoped that, once Ryan was a little older, she would be able to manage everything with more ease, but reality had other plans. The long, grueling commute to her job every morning had become a soul-crushing routine. It drained her mentally and physically, leaving her exhausted by the time she arrived home. Her mind, though willing, had grown weary, and her body was starting to protest the constant juggling act. One evening, with tears welling in her eyes, she confessed to Mark her fears about not being able to do it all. She said, almost pleading, that she simply couldn't bear the thought of not being there for Ryan at the end of the school day. But the reality was that she didn't have enough time. The daily commute consumed so much of her energy, and after a long day at work, she feared she would not be able to give her son the attention he deserved. What made it harder to accept was that John and Mary were already caring for him full-time, and their sacrifices were immense. They had given so much of themselves, and now, even though Ryan was growing, it seemed as though the mountain of responsibility only kept growing higher. Mark, too, felt the strain, but he wasn't sure what to do. He understood that their parents had already done so much, but he feared what would happen if they pulled away completely. So, with a mix of gratitude and guilt weighing on their hearts, John and Mary reluctantly agreed to extend their stay. Their return to the quiet life they had dreamt of in the countryside was once again postponed, a future that seemed increasingly distant. They told themselves it would only be a little longer, but deep down, they could feel the toll it was taking on their bodies and spirits. As the days turned into months, and the months into years, Ryan continued to grow, becoming a whirlwind of boundless energy. He was no longer the small, helpless child they had first cared for. Now, he was a lively, inquisitive little boy whose curiosity knew no bounds. His laughter echoed through the house, and his days were filled with endless activity, running around, playing, and always looking for someone to share his adventures with. To John and Mary, this was a joy, but it was also a challenge. As much as they adored their grandson, the demands of his energy were beginning to feel like an insurmountable wave. The years were catching up with them. Their bones ached, their bodies didn't move with the same swiftness as they once had, and their patience, though vast, was starting to wear thin under the constant strain of caring for a young child. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. They were, in many ways, the anchors in Ryan's life, the ones who gave him the warmth and stability he needed. But the truth was hard to face. They were growing tired. And as the days blurred together, John and Mary's dreams of peace in their countryside home seemed to slip farther and farther away. One day, as they watched Ryan play in the yard, John quietly broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind for months. With a hopeful glint in his eyes, he gently suggested that perhaps it was finally time to return to the countryside, to the peaceful life they had longed for. Their quiet retirement, nestled among the trees and open fields, was calling to them once again. But Mark, ever the practical one, had another idea. He reminded his parents that they were both retired teachers and that their wealth of experience and wisdom could still be invaluable in Ryan's life. As Ryan was about to start primary school, Mark argued, he would need their guidance more than ever, especially since both he and Emily were still working full-time, leaving little time to help with his homework or provide the steady support Ryan would need during these crucial years. Mark's words were filled with love, but they also came with a heavy weight of expectation. Emily, exhausted and torn, nodded in agreement, even though she longed to have more time to herself, to feel the freedom she had once known. And so, once again, John and Mary found themselves putting their dreams on hold, caught between the love for their grandson and the reality of their growing bodies and desires. It was a sacrifice they made willingly, but it began to feel increasingly like a burden, one that left them questioning how much longer they could continue this dance of love and duty. The realization hit John and Mary with the devastating force of a thunderclap, shaking them to their very core. It was a moment of piercing clarity, one that swept away the clouded thoughts of loyalty and sacrifice that had clouded their hearts for so long. All the years of grueling sacrifices, the long hours spent tending to their grandson, and the boundless love and energy they had poured into raising him, had suddenly seemed so utterly futile. They had given so much, far more than anyone could have asked of them, But now, in the cold silence of the hospital room, they found themselves questioning if it had all been in vain. Every ounce of effort, every sleepless night, every sacrifice made in the name of family, now seemed to have vanished into the abyss, leaving behind only the bitter taste of unappreciation. John, a man who had once prided himself on being the cornerstone of his family, an unwavering father, a loving grandfather, and a dependable support system, felt as though the very foundation of his existence had been shaken. His identity, long wrapped in the notion of familial duty, suddenly felt hollow. The years of selflessness had not been met with gratitude, but with disregard, and the realization of this stung him more than he ever thought possible. It wasn't just a loss of respect or acknowledgement, it was the crushing weight of knowing that his and Mary's efforts had been unnoticed, undervalued, and ultimately taken for granted. As he sat in the sterile, quiet room, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the soft beeping of machines, John found himself facing a painful truth. Mary lay still, recovering from her ordeal, her frail form so delicate and vulnerable at that moment, yet it was John who felt the deepest weariness. It wasn't the exhaustion of physical labor or the relentless demands of caring for a family. It was the emotional fatigue of giving everything to those who never even noticed the price. John realized then, with piercing clarity, that he could no longer bear the weight of their unappreciation. They had endured too much, given far too much, and yet here they were, left to pick up the broken pieces of a life they had sacrificed for the very people who seemed most eager to let them fade into the background. He made a decision that echoed through the chambers of his heart with undeniable finality. No more. No more would they live in the shadows of those who could not see the magnitude of their love and dedication. They would no longer allow themselves to be ignored, overlooked, or manipulated. They had given enough. It was time to reclaim their lives, to rediscover the peace they had once known, and to stand up for the quiet dignity that had always defined them. In the stillness of the room, with only the soft hum of the machines as background noise, John turned to Mary. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of years of quiet suffering. "Mary," he said, his words slow and deliberate, "once you're well enough to leave here, we're going home. We're going back to our place in the countryside, where the air is fresh, where the peace is real, and where we can finally live without the heavy burden of being taken for granted. We'll never live with Mark and Emily again. We deserve so much more than this." Mary, her eyes heavy with the exhaustion of her recovery, met his gaze. Her face softened with understanding, her silent agreement filling the room with an unspoken bond of mutual resolve. They had both given everything, and it was time to give themselves back to the life they had once cherished. Free from guilt, free from obligation, and free from the quiet resentment that had been eating away at their hearts for far too long. When Mary's health finally allowed her to leave the hospital, John stood by his promise. The day they packed their things and prepared to leave was fraught with tension, with Mark and Emily's protests ringing in their ears. The guilt trips came fast and furious, each word laden with accusations that only deepened their resolve. But John and Mary knew, with the certainty of one who has finally recognized their worth, that this was no longer about appeasing others. It was about reclaiming their dignity, their peace, and their lives. Despite the emotional pull to stay, they knew deep down that their happiness could no longer be tethered to the whims of those who had shown no gratitude for their years of sacrifice. The drive back to the countryside was long, but it was filled with a quiet kind of relief, the kind that settles in the soul when the weight of years of frustration is finally lifted. As they approached their peaceful home, the familiar landscape seemed to embrace them, offering a solace that had long been absent from their lives. The sprawling fields, the winding roads, the simplicity of a life once lived without demands, everything here spoke of a tranquility they had almost forgotten. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to its calm and serene rhythm. The world around them seemed to exhale, as if the very air had lightened, and John and Mary rediscovered a sense of peace they hadn't felt in years. Without the constant tension, without the endless emotional labor of caring for others who didn't appreciate it, they could finally breathe again. It was not just the peace of a quiet countryside. It was the peace that comes with knowing you've taken control of your life, with no more apologies to make, no more sacrifices to give. And in the stillness of their home, far from the chaos they had left behind, John and Mary found something they had almost lost, themselves. This grueling and unyielding routine stretched on, a never-ending parade of days that blended into one another. With each sunrise, Linda's body and mind felt a little more weary, a little more drained. She had become a slave to the unrelenting demands of her life, each moment consumed by responsibilities that left her with precious little time for herself. The weight of exhaustion pressed on her shoulders, sinking her deeper into a state of emotional and physical depletion. Yet, despite this overwhelming fatigue, Linda kept going. She had no choice. Every day felt like an uphill battle, but she pushed herself forward, refusing to slow down, refusing to give in to the urge to collapse. Her friends, who still lived in the peaceful, familiar surroundings of her hometown, would often reach out to her, offering her invitations to visit, to come home and rest, to take a much-needed break from the relentless pace of the city. But Linda couldn't bring herself to leave. The thought of abandoning her responsibilities, of stepping away from the never-ending cycle, felt impossible. When her friends asked how she was holding up, Linda always offered the same explanation, one she had repeated so many times it had become a mantra. Her workload was too heavy, too demanding, and her health was faltering. She had become a prisoner of her commitments, sacrificing her well-being for the sake of those who depended on her. Low blood pressure had become a constant companion, dragging her down in ways she could no longer ignore. Twice, she had fainted due to dangerously low blood sugar, but even these frightening episodes did not deter her. Linda merely brushed them off as a temporary setback and carried on, too tired and too proud to admit just how much it was costing her. Her husband, still residing in their quiet hometown, had pleaded with her to return home. He had promised her that life there would be slower, more peaceful, and that she could finally enjoy the retirement she had worked so hard for. But Linda remained in the city, entrenched in a life she had built around sacrifice and duty. She explained to him, as she had to herself, that the cost of childcare in the city was simply too high for her to leave her job. She couldn't afford to take a break, not when the financial pressure was so immense. Moreover, she didn't feel comfortable leaving her young grandchildren with a stranger. Even though it was wearing her down, even though it was taking a toll on her body and soul, Linda continued to push forward, unwilling to relinquish control or admit defeat. Linda's self-sacrifice went beyond mere responsibility. It was rooted in an overwhelming sense of duty to her children and grandchildren. She had given so much of herself for their well-being, and despite the toll it took on her, she refused to step back. She had become the embodiment of unconditional love and devotion, sacrificing her health and peace of mind for their sake. Her days were filled with an exhausting routine, but in her heart, she held on to the belief that her efforts would somehow make a difference. Even as the exhaustion gnawed at her, even as her body begged her for rest, Linda kept going. She was a mother and grandmother who had woven herself into the fabric of her family's life, and there was no way she could walk away from it, no matter the cost. But not every grandparent was willing to make the same sacrifices. In contrast to Linda's selflessness, Mrs. Vance, a 67-year-old woman from the small town of Lexington, had a very different perspective, and had been helping care for her second grandchild for the past 3 years, and at first, she had been eager to step in and lend a hand. Her heart had been full of love and excitement at the prospect of spending time with her grandchild, eager to nurture and guide him. But over time, things had shifted, and began to feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. She had initially been energized by the thought of helping, but as the months wore on, the reality of what it took to care for a young child day in and day out began to take its toll on her. It was not that she didn't love her grandchild, it was that she had come to realize that there were limits to what she could give, that even the most loving grandparents needed time for themselves, and needed to prioritize their well-being. Unlike Linda, Anne knew that her health and happiness were equally important, and she had reached a point where she knew she couldn't keep giving without first taking care of herself. Anne's decision was not an easy one. It took courage to acknowledge that her own needs mattered, that stepping back was not a sign of weakness, but rather a healthy boundary. In this way, Anne's choice became an act of self-preservation, one that allowed her to continue being a loving grandmother, but one who had also learned the importance of balance. Her story, in contrast to Linda's, was a reminder that while love and sacrifice are noble, so too is the understanding that no one can pour from an empty cup. Lessons from Mr. Miller's and Mrs. Smith's stories. The deeply emotional and heart-wrenching story of Mr. John Miller serves as a powerful and eye-opening example of invisible freeloading, a term that painfully captures the often unseen and underappreciated burdens placed on grandparents. Mr. Miller and his beloved wife Mary, like so many others in their position, found themselves sinking under the weight of a responsibility they had never truly anticipated. Every day, they poured their hearts, souls, and all of their energy into caring for their grandchildren, giving of themselves selflessly and tirelessly. They took on the roles of caregivers, nurturing figures, and moral anchors, often neglecting their own needs in the process. However, what makes their story so tragically relatable is the overwhelming sense of isolation they felt, as their sacrifices went largely unnoticed by those who should have been their greatest sources of support. Despite their unrelenting dedication and the immeasurable love they invested in these children, Mr. Miller and Mary received little to no recognition or help in return. They were, in many ways, invisible in the eyes of those they served, which only magnified their sense of exhaustion and emotional depletion. Their story stands as a stark reminder of how the quiet, yet monumental, sacrifices made by grandparents often go unacknowledged and unappreciated, leaving them to bear a heavy burden alone. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Similarly, the experiences of Helen and Linda offer another heartbreaking perspective on the complexities of grandparent caregiving. Both women, who adore their families beyond measure, have learned, often through trial, error, and overwhelming emotional cost, the critical importance of maintaining their well-being. Unlike the self-sacrificing patterns seen in Mr. Miller and his wife, Helen, and Linda recognized that their love for their children and grandchildren should never come at the cost of their health, happiness, or personal sense of identity. For years, they had bent over backward to meet the emotional, physical, and psychological needs of their loved ones, only to find that their well-being was crumbling beneath the weight of these constant demands. They came to understand, in a painful yet liberating realization, that true caregiving must come from a place of balance, where one's own needs are acknowledged and respected. By setting firm boundaries, they made it clear that, while their love for their families was boundless, their own emotional and physical health could not be sacrificed for the sake of others. Helen and Linda's stories offer a powerful and courageous reminder. Grandparents, like anyone else, are entitled to their own lives, their peace, and their joy. They too must learn to honor their own needs and to say no when the burden becomes too much to bear. Just as Mr. Miller and his wife reached a tipping point where they had to reassess their situation, so too did Helen and Linda arrive at a moment of reckoning. In both cases, the deep love and care they felt for their families did not negate the fact that they were human beings who deserved respect, care, and the space to nurture themselves. Through their stories, we are reminded of a fundamental truth. Caregiving is important, but it should never, ever come at the expense of one's sense of autonomy, health, or happiness. It is only by drawing clear boundaries, embracing self-care, and acknowledging the importance of personal well-being that grandparents can truly thrive in their roles. In the end, caregiving should be a relationship of mutual respect, where both the giver and the receiver recognize the value and dignity of each other's existence. Mr. Miller and Mary's painful journey, along with Helen and Linda's transformative realization, together form a poignant and crucial lesson. Love is essential, but so is the preservation of self. They both show us that, to be there for others, we must first be there for ourselves. 1. Live separately from your children if possible. As time flows onward, the trajectory of life shifts in ways that we often cannot anticipate. Just as the youthful years of children are characterized by exploration, independence, and the creation of their social circles, so too do the years of adulthood offer a unique path. While the bonds of the family remain invaluable, the decision to live separately, though sometimes difficult, can provide profound benefits to both parents and their adult children, creating a healthier dynamic for all involved. One of the most powerful advantages of living apart is the freedom it grants older adults from the unrelenting demands of daily caregiving. As well-intentioned as family obligations may be, older adults often find themselves inadvertently cast into the role of unpaid babysitters, which can quickly lead to emotional burnout, fatigue, and even resentment. The constant pressure to care for grandchildren or manage household responsibilities that are no longer theirs to bear can leave parents feeling trapped in a cycle of self-sacrifice. When families choose to live separately, however, the burden is lifted, allowing parents the precious gift of time to relax, time to rediscover their passions, and time to nourish their friendships and hobbies without the weight of constant responsibility. In addition to the personal freedom gained, living apart fosters an environment of mutual respect and reduces the likelihood of conflict. When parents and adult children share a home, the delicate balance of roles and expectations often becomes blurred. What begins as a well-meaning arrangement can quickly spiral into frustration when issues of independence, privacy, and boundaries collide. Living in separate spaces offers the essential breathing room to allow both generations to maintain a sense of autonomy, creating an atmosphere of peace and respect that can sometimes be elusive under one roof. For older adults, living apart opens up opportunities for enrichment that are tailored to their own needs and desires. This arrangement enables them to engage in social activities with peers, pursue long-held passions, or explore new hobbies they've always dreamed of but never had the time or energy for. The result is a life that is not only more fulfilling but also filled with joy and purpose, critical elements for a happy, healthy retirement. Moreover, despite the physical distance, the emotional closeness between parents and children can thrive. In times of need, parents can still offer support and guidance, but now, their assistance is given with a sense of voluntary love rather than obligation, and the quality of those moments together can be far more meaningful. Ultimately, living separately doesn't equate to a severing of bonds. It's a way to honor each other's individuality, foster a deeper connection, and ensure that family relationships are nurtured, not strained. 2. Don't let your children become bystanders. In today's fast-paced, high-pressure world, where society often pushes us to put the needs of others before our own, it's easy to fall into the trap of self-sacrifice. Many people believe it's only natural for parents to step in and take on the responsibility of caring for their grandchildren, as though this is simply the way things are supposed to be. However, as heartbreaking as it is, the story of Mr. John Miller and his wife Mary serves as a powerful reminder that such decisions should never be made lightly, nor should they ever turn into automatic, unspoken sacrifices that erode one's dignity and sense of fairness. Mr. Miller and his wife, initially motivated by love and the desire to support their son Mark and his wife Emily, had agreed to care for their grandson. It seemed like a generous and selfless decision, an opportunity to bond with their grandchild and help their son and daughter-in-law focus on their demanding careers. But over time, their willingness to help, which once came from a place of love and devotion, slowly transformed into an overwhelming burden. What started as a shared commitment eventually morphed into a one-sided arrangement, where the grandparents found themselves, day after day, acting as unpaid, overworked babysitters. The joy they once felt in caring for their grandson began to fade, replaced by exhaustion, frustration, and the heavy weight of being taken for granted. This gradual shift did not go unnoticed. The expectations of John and Mary continued to grow, without any corresponding effort from their children to ease their load or show appreciation. The responsibilities, instead of being shared equitably, were stacked upon their already weary shoulders. Mark and Emily, perhaps unknowingly, had allowed the situation to spiral out of control, taking advantage of the goodwill of their parents. In doing so, they not only failed to show gratitude but also inadvertently created an environment that was emotionally, physically, and mentally unsustainable for the very people who had once been there to support them. This situation is not just unfair, it's deeply unjust. The act of giving is one of the greatest gifts parents can offer, but it must never come at the cost of their well-being. The children in this equation, both the parents and the grandchildren, must recognize the immense value of what their grandparents offer and actively contribute in return. Children need to understand that the burden of parenting cannot and should not fall on one generation alone. After a long day at work, after the stress of endless meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities, the parents deserve more than just a few words of appreciation. They deserve support. They deserve help. They deserve the time and space to recharge and be human, not just parents. Children need to step up, to contribute to the family unit in meaningful ways. Whether it's by helping with household chores, assisting with the grandchildren, or simply offering emotional support, every little bit counts. Parenting is not just a duty, it is a shared responsibility, a responsibility that requires the active participation of everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, to ensure a healthy, balanced, and loving family dynamic. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. To avoid this heartbreaking and unfair situation, parents must set clear, firm boundaries before agreeing to take on the role of caregivers. These boundaries should never be seen as negotiable or secondary to the needs of others. While it's easy to get caught up in the rush of family dynamics and to fall into patterns of doing things out of a sense of duty, it's essential to communicate openly, honestly, and with compassion. By doing so, they can preserve not only their well-being but also the strength and harmony of the entire family unit. Without these boundaries, what began as a loving gesture could soon unravel into something far more painful, a silent resentment that festers beneath the surface, threatening to undo the very bonds that were once so strong. 3. Make retirement plans early. John Miller and his beloved wife Mary had long cherished the dream of returning to their serene, picturesque hometown after years of tireless labor, seeking a peaceful retreat to savor the golden years of their lives. They envisioned waking up each morning to the sound of birdsong, breathing in the fresh country air, and savoring the quiet rhythm of life. Yet, life, with its unpredictable twists, had other plans. When their son, Mark, and his wife, Emily, found themselves overwhelmed with the demanding responsibilities of raising their young children, John and Mary made a heart-wrenching choice. Their dreams of retirement, so carefully nurtured over the years, were put on hold. The deep, unshakable bond of family called them back to the bustling city, where they felt an unwavering duty to step in and help with childcare. It was a decision grounded in love and sacrifice, believing that family always came first, no matter the cost to their happiness and future. Looking back, Mr. Miller often reflected on how well thought out his retirement plans had been, thought out but ultimately derailed by the very unpredictability of life. Had he been more decisive when his grandson, Ryan, reached the milestone of turning 3 and starting kindergarten, he might have been able to embrace the quiet, peaceful life he had once dreamed of. Both John and Mary were blessed with stable pensions and a secure financial footing, allowing them to help their children in other ways, by contributing to daycare or hiring a babysitter, without fully abandoning their plans. Yet, in the rush of selfless love and duty, they had neglected to assert their own needs. For older adults, the importance of starting retirement planning early cannot be overstated. Life, as Mr. Miller's experience proves, has a way of shifting the best-laid plans, often leaving one feeling trapped in circumstances that gradually become suffocating. When life loses its joy and comfort, it becomes even more crucial to take that bold, decisive step toward the retirement you've always envisioned. Parents, especially, devote so much of their lives to the well-being of their children, so often setting their dreams aside. But as children grow, so too must the understanding that personal fulfillment and happiness are not mere luxuries. They are vital to living a full and meaningful life in those later years. The heart-wrenching truth is that time waits for no one, and if you don't take control of your future, you may find yourself looking back with regret, wishing you had made different choices. The key lies in balancing love and duty with the courage to pursue your dreams and well-being. As we wrap up today's video, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, and as we've seen with John and Mary, even the best-laid retirement plans can be challenged by unexpected circumstances. The key takeaway here is that planning for your future, whether it's retirement, family obligations, or personal goals, is vital, but flexibility and decisiveness in the face of change are just as important. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned from today's story that you plan to bring into your own life? Drop your thoughts and insights in the comments below. And if you found this video valuable, please leave your comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful content to you. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.